Human skeletal system is divided into two main parts, axial and appendicular. In this presentation, I will discuss about axial skeleton. There are 206 bones, out of which 80 bones are from axial skeleton. Axial skeleton comprises of skull, vertebral column and sternum. Skull. It has got 29 bones. It is endoskeleton in nature. Why? Because its position is inside the body. It is above the vertebral column. You see, this is the vertebral column made up of different types of vertebra. So you see, above to it we find the skull. So skull is above to vertebral column, and skull is considered as the heaviest part of the body. It has four parts: the cranium, face, hyoid bone. It is missing in this model. Hyoid bone we see just here, and sensory capsules are there, and dicondyles are there. Two condyles on the sides of foramen magnum. So these are the two condyles. Cranium. This is the cranium. It is large and hollow. It is large and hollow. It gives protection to the brain. On its ventromedial side, it has a large opening called foramen magnum, through which brain continues with the spinal cord. So if we look inside to it, and more appropriately to the ventromedial side, we see a opening which is large opening and is termed as foramen magnum. Why it is there? It is the brain which continues with the spinal cord. And so this cranium is formed of 8 bones. What are these? Frontal bone, parietal bones on either sides, occipital bone just behind to the cranium, temporal bone, sphenoidal bone, it is not visible here, and ethmoid bone also, it is not visible. Temporal bones have middle ears. This temporal bone, which is the inside, has got middle ears, each of which has 3 bony ossicles. And this temporal bone have middle ear, and this middle ear is formed of 3 bones or ossicles, small bones, that is malleus, incus and stapes. Now I will talk about the sutures, skull sutures. Now what is a skull suture? You see, I think this is not visible. This is the frontal bone. Either side you have the parietal bone and occipital bone behind to the cranium. So suture is something that joins the different parts of the cranium. Such as you see, this is the suture which joins frontal bone with the parietal bone, and this suture joins two parietal bones. Also from behind this, which joins with the parietal bone, which joins with the occipital bone, there is also a suture. So sutures are immovable fibrous joints present in the cranium. Three important sutures: coronal sutures, lambdoidal suture and sagittal suture. Coronal suture, it lies between frontal and parietal bone. So between frontal and parietal bone, the joining fibrous joint, you see, this fibrous joint is known as the coronal suture. So you should remember, coronal suture joins frontal and parietal bones. Lambdoidal suture. Lambdoidal suture joins parietal and occipital bones. It lies between parietal and occipital bone. So coronal suture is in the front, and behind we see lambdoidal suture which lies between parietal and occipital bone, and sagittal suture lies between this suture lies between two parietal bones. Now face. Total number of bones in face is 14. It forms the front and lower part of the skull. So face forms the frontal and the lower part of the skull. So bones which are present in the face we have nasal bones, 2 in number, concave, 2, vomer. These all are present in the nose, nasal, concave, vomer. Lacrimals in the orbital fossa in the eyes. Zygomatics, okay. Palatines, maxilla is this is a maxilla, and mandible. We have one mandible. You see, this is one mandible. Maxilla is 2. Either side of the nose we find maxilla. Now coming to vertebral column, which is an important part of the axial skeleton. Vertebral column, as I mentioned, it is the backbone, and above to it we find the skull. So total number of vertebra is 33. It is a backbone and its length is 70 centimeter. You should remember. It is curved. It is not visible from one side. If you see from the lateral side, you will find that this vertebral column is curved. It is curved bony rod present on the dorsal side of the neck and trunk. It is present on the dorsal side of the neck and tongue. This is the ventral side. Behind we have the dorsal side. So dorsal side of neck and trunk we find the vertebral column. Now the curves of vertebral column. You see, and here obviously the vertebral formula is given. C7, TH12, L5, S5 and CO4. Total comes 33. This is like C7. Cervical vertebra. So total number of cervical vertebra is 7. Next comes the thoracic vertebra, which is present behind the thorax. It has 12 vertebrae in it. Lumbar vertebra, it has 5. Sacrum or sacral vertebra, more appropriately, it has 5 vertebrae in it. And coccyx, we have 4. Total 33. So curves of the vertebral column, there are 4 curves: cervical and lumbar. This cervical and lumbar curve, let me show you with an okay. So actually vertebral column looks like this. I'm drawing. Okay. If you see this model, it looks like straight, but actually it is this type. So 4 curves: this cervical and lumbar, these are forwardly directed and helps in erect body posture, that is straight body posture. And you see this thoracic, I'm showing with different color, this thoracic and sacral, this is sacral, is directed backward. Okay, so 4 curves: cervical and lumbar, these are forwardly directed, and sacral and thoracic, this is backwardly directed backward. But in this model, it is, you find that this is straight only, but no, it is actually this shape which I have shown to you. Now coming to individual vertebra of this vertebral column. So 33 vertebra are there. Cervical has got 7 vertebra, cervical region. So these cervical vertebra are considered as the first. The cervical vertebra, one thing to note, the first cervical vertebra, there are total 7 cervical vertebra. The first cervical vertebra is known as atlas. It is, which I have shown to you, you can see the picture. This is the atlas vertebra and it is the first cervical vertebra out of the 7. It is ring shaped and it lacks centrum. Now what is centrum? This is not so important as of now. And superior surface has 2 facets for occipital condyle. This cervical vertebra is joins with the skull with 2 condyles, as I have mentioned earlier. So with 2 facets, superior facets, it joins with the atlas. Now inferior surface has a facet for the odontoid process of the axis. So the second cervical vertebra is known as the axis. So axis is joined with the atlas by a facet, and this facet is present on the inferior surface of the cervical vertebra. Because the odontoid process of the axis vertebra joins with the inferior facet of the atlas vertebra. Just to remember like this. This is not so important as of now. Axis vertebra, this is the second cervical vertebra. And you see this picture. This is the dens. As I mentioned, this dens of this second cervical vertebra joins with the inferior facet of the atlas and it is directed upward. So this is the odontoid process or dens. Now thoracic vertebra. This covers the entire thoracic region. It has 12 this is 12 in number. It has a large transverse process. There are different processes for individual vertebra. If this is a vertebra you see, I have shown in the diagram. These two are the transverse process and this is the spinous process. So thoracic vertebra has large transverse process and this black region you see, here the ribs attaches. So these are the facets where ribs are attached to the thoracic vertebra. Now lumbar vertebra. Lumbar vertebra. It is 5 in number. It is the large and bulky vertebra. So large and bulky vertebra are the lumbar vertebra. Lumbar vertebra. Okay. Now finally, not actually finally because we have coccyx. Now the sacrum. You see, I think it is not so visible here. This is the sacrum and it is made up of sacral vertebra. These are fused together to form the sacrum. It is a large, mostly more or less triangular in shape. This is triangular in shape and found above the coccyx vertebra. These are the coccyx vertebra or the tail vertebra and it is above to it. And I have already mentioned it is a fused sacral vertebra and found between the pelvic girdle. So between the pelvic girdle we have the sacrum. You see this diagram, this is triangular in shape. These are the coccyx. Above to it we have the sacrum and it is actually a fused form of the sacral vertebra. And if this is the pelvic girdle, so it is found between the pelvic girdle, hip. Now coccyx, it is found just below to the sacrum vertebra and it is formed by the fusion of the coccygeal vertebra. It is small, more or less triangular, also known as tailbone. Is missing here. Also known as the tailbone. Now come to the ribs. Ribs are 12 pairs, that is 24. These are half circular and is present in the thorax region. And anterior, that is anterior to the ribs, we have the sternum, that is the sternal part, and posterior to the thorax we have the vertebral part. So ribs are also categorized into 3 types: true ribs, false ribs and floating ribs. First 7 pairs, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. These first 7 pairs, you see, it is directly attached to the sternum. So these are true ribs. But 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. But 8, 9, 10, these are called as the false ribs. 8th, 9th and 10th pair known as the false ribs because the vertebral parts are attached to the vertebra, but sternal part attached to the 7th pair of ribs. You see this 8, 9 and 10 ribs are not attached directly with the 8, 9, 10 not attached directly with the sternum. Instead it is fused with the 7th pair of ribs, so it is called as false ribs. Now last 2 pairs of ribs, which is 11th and 12th, known as the floating ribs, and you see it is not attached to the sternum. These 2 ribs, 2 pairs of ribs 11 and 12, is not attached to the sternum, so it is considered as floating ribs. Sternum, it is the breastbone, also called as breastbone. It is an important part of the axial skeleton. It is an elongated bone, flat on shape, similar to a dagger, present in the mid-ventral side of the thorax. Actually this is the ventral side and this is the dorsal side. So this breastbone, sternum, is present in the mid position, mid-ventral side of this thorax. Now functions of the axial skeleton. So let's elaborate the functions with individual parts. That is a skull. It protects and supports the brain. Skull, what does it do? It protects the brain. Vertebra. Different vertebra together forms the vertebral column, as I have mentioned, that is cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacrum and coccyx. And spinal cord is present inside this column. So vertebra actually protects the spinal cord from any injury. Atlas vertebra supports the head, because I have mentioned this atlas vertebra joins with the 2 condyles of the cranium, and axis vertebra, which is the second cervical vertebra, helps in the rotation or sidewise movement of the head, and lumbar vertebra helps in the erect posture, and intervertebral discs are present between the vertebra, which acts as shock absorbers. So let me show with the color. If this is the vertebra, different types of vertebra, so in between the vertebra, let's consider this as lumbar vertebra, and between this vertebra there is a disc called as the intervertebral disc. What does it do? It acts as shock absorber. And ribs, it is a part of the thoracic cage. Ribs make up the thoracic cage and protects our lungs and heart and other important vessels. Sternum is the attachment points of the ribs, as I have mentioned.